I was 13 when I was sold. My name was not asked, nor was my consent. I was taken from a village that now only exists in memory. Its walls collapsed by the weight of history and the cries of forgotten girls like me. We were called gifts, as if the Sultan's court was a generous recipient of broken lives wrapped in silk. We were loaded into carriages under a dark moon, each girl quieter than the next, each face painted with silent terror. The older ones had already learned not to cry. I still hadn't. My tears made my captors scarf. As if innocence was a burden they needed to beat out of me early. The journey was long, and we were not allowed to speak. When we reached Constantinople, we were washed and stripped of everything familiar. They shaved our heads, burned our clothes, gave us perfumes and renamed us. I was now Afsana, a beautiful lie. I used to be Leela. I remember the first time I saw the harem. The walls were gold, but they weren't warm. The light from the torches danced on the marble like a serpent's tongue. The eunuchs, men who were no longer men, guarded every door with eyes that did not blink. They, too, were prisoners, but we feared them more than we feared the unknown. There were over 300 women in the harem, but none of us were free. The first months were the worst. They called it education, we called it breaking. We were taught to walk without noise, to smile without joy, to dance without pride. Our bodies were sculpted for entertainment, our minds erased for obedience. We were taught poetry not to express ourselves, but to impress the Sultan if we were ever summoned. We were schooled in sensuality, not love. We were trained to sleep in silence, wake at command, and always keep our eyes lowered. Every day, I stood in line, examined like livestock. Our food was rationed based on how valuable we were considered. One bruise or scar could mean you were cast out to scrub floors. If you bled during the bath rituals, you'd be beaten for polluting the waters. The elder concubines had a hierarchy. They enforced the rules with precision and cruelty. One girl from the north, Ayla, refused to smile during a music lesson. They forced her to kneel for 12 hours while the rest of us danced. Her knees bled onto the marble. I never saw her again. We whispered at night, sharing what little warmth we had. Stories of where we came from, dreams of escape. They would catch us sometimes and punish us. One girl had her tongue cut halfway down, just enough to muffle speech, but not enough to kill. She survived, barely. The Sultan's mother, the valid Sultan, ruled over us. She wore pearls like armor and spoke only in commands. She selected the women who would be presented to the Sultan. To be chosen meant a higher rank, but also meant you belonged to him now, fully. When I was chosen, I was 16, my skin was pale, my hair long, and my obedience complete. I had learned not to breathe too loud. That night, they bathed me in milk, burned rose oil through the holes, and dressed me in red silk so thin it felt like shame. I remember walking down the corridor, knowing I could not turn back. I had dreamed of escape every night for 3 years, but now I walked forward, barefoot, like an offering. He was older than I imagined. Bored eyes, cold hands. I was one of many. I was there not for desire, but tradition. He didn't even ask my name. That night was the longest night of my life, and the quietest. When I returned to the dormitories, the other girls looked at me with envy. One even smiled. They didn't know I had died a little, but I smiled back. That's what we were taught to do. Once you're favored, you're watched. Other women tried to poison my food. I learned to sleep lightly. The harem was not just a prison. It was a battlefield. We were weapons disguised as women, dressed in colors that hid the bruises underneath. I had to learn politics now. Who to kneel for, who to compliment, who to avoid. The valid Sultan had her favorites, and those favorites had servants, and those servants had spies. One girl, named Zainab, befriended me. She braided my hair, shared secrets. One night, she asked me about the Sultan. I spoke to freely. The next day, those same words were repeated to the valid Sultan, but twisted. I was accused of dishonor. They locked me in a stone room without food for 4 days. Just water, just silence, just the dark. When they let me out, I never spoke to Zeynep again. I had learned the first true law of the harem. There are no friends, only survivors. This is just the beginning of what Ottoman concubines like me endured. Behind the veils and velvet, behind the incense and jewelry, was a war for survival. After surviving my punishment, I was given a choice: submit completely or learn the art of survival in silence. I chose silence, but I sharpened it into a blade. Weeks after my release, the Sultan called for me again. I thought I'd been forgotten, but something had changed in me. The fear was still there, but behind it, a quiet hunger. I had tasted what it meant to be discarded. Now, I needed to rise. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just listened. I watched his eyes, his mannerisms, his impatience. And when I left, I knew something the others didn't. He wasn't looking for love. He wasn't even looking for pleasure. He was looking for someone who made him feel seen. So I became that mirror. Weeks turned to months. I was invited more frequently. I received better clothes, more jewelry, even a servant of my own. But luxury in the harem was never a blessing. It was bait. And I was now a glowing target. Zeynep, the girl who had betrayed me, had moved up in rank as well. She wasn't a favorite, but she was close to one. She had learned how to manipulate without emotion. Her lips smiled, but her eyes betrayed a viper's patience. We no longer spoke, but we circled each other. At bath time, in the courtyard, during ceremonies. She watched me, and I watched her. Then one morning, I woke to find my servant collapsed on the floor, frothing at the mouth, dead. They said it was a disease, but I knew I had eaten the same stew she was supposed to bring me. Zeynep had tried to kill me, but this time, I didn't run to the valid sultan. I didn't weep. I remembered her tactic: use silence as a weapon. Power in the harem didn't belong to the favorites. It belonged to the silent ones. The laundry women, the eunuchs who swept the halls, the bath attendants. I started listening to them. I offered coins, stories, kindness. Slowly, they gave me information. Zeynep had bribed a kitchen girl. That girl had vanished after the poisoning. But I discovered she had a brother working in the stables. He confirmed she had been paid with a necklace wrapped in purple silk. Only the second-rank favorites used that silk. So it was her, but I couldn't strike directly. Accusations had to be sewn into the right hands. That's when I found Hasna, an older concubine who had once held the Sultan's eye, but was now just a librarian in the harem's archives. No one noticed her, but she noticed everything. She taught me how to lay seeds. Whispers passed through the wrong ears could become truth. And with Hasna's help, I started to build my revenge. During a feast for the Sultan's birthday, every concubine of rank was required to attend. The tables overflowed with fruit, sweets, rose sherbet, and meat roasted on gold-trimmed trays. I knew Zeynep would sit near the valid sultan, close enough to be seen, far enough not to be accused of ambition. I had arranged for a peach to be placed at her seat. A single, ripe peach, dusted with crushed almond and soaked in syrup. Except the syrup wasn't honey. It was a tincture from Hasna's cabinet. Not deadly, but enough to cause paralysis, to make the body convulse, to make the mouth foam. Just like my servant, she bit into it midway through the meal. The sound of her fork hitting the floor silenced the room. She stood, then collapsed. Eunuchs rushed to her aid. The valid sultan stood, disgusted, and I stayed still, eyes lowered, hands folded. She did not die, but she would never walk again. And more importantly, she would never be believed again. She was dismissed quietly, sent to a remote wing, her name never spoken again in the presence of power. My revenge had bloomed like a rose, beautiful and thorned. With Zeynep gone, I was elevated. The Sultan summoned me not just for knights, but for advice. He asked what I thought of his poetry. He asked if I missed my home. He even asked me if I hated him. I said no. I smiled. But inside me burned the truth. I hated everything he represented. But I had learned how to use hate like perfume. Strong enough to linger, subtle enough not to be detected. Then one night, he asked me something new. Would I consider becoming a concubine effendi, an official wife? The harem froze when they heard. Only 4 women could hold that title. It was an honor that came with land, servants, and influence. I accepted, but I knew this meant a new kind of danger. Because now, I wasn't just part of the harem. I was part of the throne. I'd risen higher than most concubines ever could, but with elevation came enemies. Becoming concubine effendi changed everything. I no longer walked among the concubines. I was carried. I no longer ate in silence. I dined in chambers meant for royalty. My room was no longer bare. It shimmered with imported silks and glass from Venice, but peace, that never came. Power in the palace was a game of veiled claws. The Sultan trusted me, but that made me a target, not by the concubines anymore, by his mother, his viziers, and especially the chief consort, who had given him sons. Her name was Gulbahar, and her smile could peel skin. I overheard whispers that Gulbahar was preparing a revolt, not against the Sultan, but against me. She didn't want me dead. She wanted me ruined, and her plan. She would frame me for poisoning the Sultan. One morning, the Sultan fell ill. He had sipped rose tea from a golden cup, his favorite drink. Hours later, he collapsed. Doctors rushed in, eunuchs scurried, prayers were whispered in every tongue spoken in the empire. And then, fingers pointed to me. Only a handful of us knew which herbs he preferred. And the kitchen servant who prepared the drink, gone, disappeared. I was summoned. I expected to be imprisoned, tortured, but instead, the valid Sultan sat me down and stared into my eyes. He will survive, she said. But you must now answer one question. I braced myself. Do you love him? My silence was louder than any answer. She stood. Then you must survive this. She gave me one chance. Find the traitor, prove myself innocent, or vanish into the dungeon and be forgotten. I had 2 days. I turned to Hasna, my only ally left. Together, we unraveled what I already suspected. Gulbahar had planted the poison. But it wasn't in the tea. It was in the cup. The gold had been brushed with an oil from the mandrake root, harmless in water, deadly when heated. We tracked the servant who disappeared. She had been hidden in a laundry chamber under the kitchen, gagged, alive, frightened. She told us everything. Gulbahar had offered her money to vanish and blame the tea. She was promised safety, but fear made her hide instead. I brought the girl before the valid Sultan that evening. She confessed. The Sultan awoke the next morning, weak but lucid. I stood beside his bed. He said only one thing: you did not run. And I replied, running is for those who wish to forget. Gulbahar was stripped of her title. Her son was removed from succession. She was exiled to Eden, a distant province. No royal escort, no ceremony, but my revenge didn't stop there. I requested the Sultan issue one final decree, that the women's quarters be given equal voice in palace affairs, not just through whispers, but in writing. That we, the harem, could vote on matters concerning our own daily lives. He agreed. For the first time in decades, the concubines were given paper, ink, authority. They called me the Iron Mirror, because I had reflected back to the empire what it truly was: beautiful, cruel, and in need of a reckoning. Years later, the Sultan died in his sleep. I was no longer a concubine. I was a widow of the empire, dressed in mourning silk, head held high as ambassadors bowed to me. Hasna had passed on. Zainab remained paralyzed, tucked away in some forgotten wing. Gulbahar's name had been erased from all court records, but mine was engraved into the walls of the new library I helped build within the harem. A plaque, written in Ottoman script, that read, "She suffered, survived." and rewrote the rules. My story was not about beauty or luck. It was about vengeance, patience, and a quiet, merciless will. If this story moved you, shocked you, or opened your eyes, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The more we share these hidden truths, the more we honor those whose voices were buried by history. Do you have a historical figure or mystery you want us to uncover next? Comment below. We might just tell your story.